Nathan Zagura, Ken Carmen, and we have another esteemed guest with us now. It is the Browns' Chief Strategy Officer, Paul DePodesta. And Paul, I mean, how are you feeling back here with the fans? It's great.
This is great. Beautiful day. Great day to be here. Great energy from the fans. It's been awesome.
So as you guys kind of go through this, and this is the Orange and Brown practice, you know, we kind of go through the plan, getting ready. Jacksonville now less than a week away, the first preseason game. How do you kind of think things have gone so far in training camp for this organization?
Oh, I think really positively so far. I think we're happy with the way it's gone. I think Kevin's getting everybody ready. It's been fun this year just to actually have a preseason, right?
Yeah.
I mean, last year we went, had to practice for 6 weeks without a preseason, so I think we're really happy about it. Whenever you go into training camp, your biggest worry is injuries,
sure,
right? And, knock on wood, so far so good. We've had, some small ones, but nothing so far that's going to inhibit our season at all.
So many people talk about working smarter instead of harder, all that other stuff. I know that's a cheap throwaway line. But from last year to this year, was there anything that you guys learned to go, hey, we might be able to do this better, even though we're dealing with something very difficult right now, we could do something better here through 2021 and beyond?
There were a lot of learnings from COVID, things that we had to change just out of necessity last year that, we took some time this offseason to sit down and say, okay, we had to do a lot of things differently. What do we want to continue of those things? And there are quite a few of them. And there's some things in our schedule, certain meetings that we do, we're now doing online or we do them differently. So I think we're, at the end of the day, we're better off for it because it forced us into some uncomfortable positions, but forced us also to come up with some creative solutions. And like I said, some of those are better than what we had previously.
And don't you think without the benefits of last year and those learnings that for a guy like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who, by the way, is flying around the field today and has been since he's come back, but you were better prepared to keep him up to speed even though he wasn't able to be physically in the building because virtual meetings and the Zoom, that was something that we're now all well-versed in.
Well, think about it. Our coaches had to learn to teach online immediately, right? I mean, when it hit last year, we were almost going into spring practice, so they had to figure out how to teach remotely. And at the time, we were brand new schemes on both sides of the ball, too, so we couldn't just let the spring go and not teach anything. And they really collaborated with one another. I mean, they were all trying out different things. They'd come back from their meetings, say, hey, I tried this worked, this didn't, you should try this. And it's unbelievable how good they got at teaching online in such a short period of time. And that's clearly carried over to this year. I mean, not just in the spring with our rookies, and we treated that differently than we had previously, but even now into the fall.
I want to ask you about the rookie minicamp. And, you learned things last year that were kind of by necessity. And then this year, rookie minicamp looked different than it ever had before. There weren't enough guys to go 11 on 11. But what you got were situations where Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was 1-on-2 with Ben Bloom and Jason Tarver. And, Anthony Schwartz was getting great time with Chad O'Shea. And I'll take it to, on the offensive line. James Hudson was the guy with, Bill Callahan and Scott Peters. Was there any finding that came out that, hey, this might be the way to do it because it felt like the rookies hit minicamp further along than I remember in years past, and at training camp, some of them, they don't really even look like rookies. They look like they know what they're doing. Is that something that maybe there's a learning from?
It's interesting. We always like to have all our players here, obviously. We want everyone getting better all the time. But as you noted, we got a couple days into it, we said, all right, put yourself in the shoes of James Hudson right now.
Yeah.
You're getting a one-on-one tutorial with Bill Callahan.
Couldn't pay for that.
For weeks, at a time.
Yeah.
It was unbelievably valuable. I mean, unbelievably valuable for all those guys. Again, like you said, you mentioned JOK. He and Tony Fields were doing walkthrough calls and filling gaps, with Coach Tarver and Bloom. And that's experience they otherwise wouldn't get. So I think it ended up being really, really valuable for all those rookies.
Does it feel like, I hate to use the words program, but as an organization, you're where you want to be in being able to take a guy like James Hudson and go, okay, I don't need to throw you out there right now, but over the next couple of years, we can work you in. Demetric felt in the same way. How much more confident do you feel in the organization than when it started with you?
Sure. Well, ideally, we want to be in a position where young players force their way onto the field, that we don't have to put them out there because that's all we have, right? That they actually win the job. And I think you're always better off that that's the case. We certainly have a lot more depth now than we have in a long time, and I think these rookies are going to be forced to win those opportunities. And even if it means they get less time this year than they maybe would have if they had been a rookie 4 or 5 years ago, I think they'll still be better off for it because of the competition they're facing day in and day out in practice.
You're listening to the voice of Chief Strategy Officer Paul DePodesta in our interview brought to you by Global Transport. Cody Parkey putting it through the uprights, which everybody likes to see down there. The crowd very happy with that. And so I want to ask you about, you mentioned the depth on this roster, and we're going through and trying to look at the battles. Who's going to be the sixth linebacker? Who's the sixth corner, the 9th and 10 offensive lineman? How valuable is it to have preseason games to make those decisions, because they're going to be tougher this year than probably ever before, where now other teams are going to be looking at who did the Browns cut that we can bring into our organization, where probably 4 or 5 years ago is the opposite. Who can we get into our organization?
Right. We actually were talking about this earlier this week and even last week. Was not only do we not have a preseason last year, but this year we probably have different priorities going into the preseason than we did 3, 4, 5 years ago. There are certain players we want to see. There are certain players that we don't have to see. Do we need to see Nick Chubb run the ball in the preseason? It'd be fun, but we probably don't need it, right?
Don't need it.
So in that sense, I think we had to sort of start with a blank sheet of paper again. Say, okay, what do we want out of this preseason? We have 3 games, instead of 4. And, who needs the work? Who do we need to see? And what is really important for them to get out of this? So I think this preseason is going to look very different than any one that we had previously.
Well, that piggybacks right off of what I wanted to ask you. Okay, I'm a radio guy.
There's some pay attention to the scores in there, by the way, from Mr. DePodesta.
It's true. So we always, when there's different things, we just want to find something we're comfortable with so we can go ahead and we can make grandiose statements about every organization. How do you guys stay sharp? Because there's so many times where it's like, okay, we know what the Browns do, we know what the Chargers do, we know what X does, and then you got to be able to change with the times, and the times could change week to week in this league.
Sure. Well, I think it's part of our organizational culture to constantly try to get better. Look, the reality is we come into this season, we're 0-0. I mean, forget about what we did last year was great and it was a lot of fun, but unfortunately it doesn't count toward this year, at all. So we certainly haven't accomplished our ultimate goals yet. So there's still a lot in front of us, and we know we don't have all the answers. So it's easy for us to continue to ask those questions, to try to get better and push ourselves, and try to do it maybe differently than we had previously.
And when you think about, the 3 preseason games, but I loved Kevin Stefanski's already talking about, well, in the 17th game, we figure that's maybe 70 more reps for our players, so we're going to have to maybe back that off and practice here and there. Just kind of the level of detail, no stone unturned in trying to make sure that the approach is to get our guys as healthy as they can be throughout the season and into what we hope is a postseason run.
Sure. I mean, I think that's emblematic of how we do things, or at least how we aspire to do things, right? We want to be very thoughtful about everything that we do. That doesn't mean we're going to get it right all the time. In fact, we know we're going to get a lot of things wrong, but we are going to be very, very, very thoughtful, very deliberate about all the decisions we make. And that goes for, taking someone in the draft to also trying to figure out, okay, how many reps is he going to get in preseason game number 2? Yeah.
Well, by the way, what have we done to update the simulations? Because we know you ran through millions and millions, but none of them produced Newsome and Owusu-Koramoah. So how are we updating our simulation software, Paul?
Yeah, we're working on it. No, we were very excited about it. I mean, ultimately, we did think there was a chance with where we were in the second round that there might be someone who gets there to us that was unexpected. Someone that we really liked, that we thought maybe was a first-round type talent, but happened to get to that part of the draft. Just because that happens,
Sure.
fairly often. We ran through a bunch of different scenarios in the weeks leading up to the draft, courtesy of Ken Kovash and some others that put all that together for us. And in none of those did JOK come available. But there were times when other players that I would call of similar caliber came available. So I think we were at least ready for the situation, and we had to ask ourselves, okay, depending on where we are in the second round, at what point do we get aggressive? Like, at what point does it make sense for us to try to trade up if one of these guys is there? And we had a very short list of those guys, and AB was ready, and he pounced when the opportunity was there, and we were able to get him. It was very exciting. So we're perfectly happy if that ends up being a 1 in 100. At least it was a 1. It happened one time.
Unforeseen positive outcomes are always welcome.
Welcome.
Yes,
yep.
Indeed. I want to ask you, we've been talking a lot about Donovan Peoples-Jones, and he's one of those guys that, you guys took a gamble on in the 6th round, former 5-star top wide receiver recruit in the country, and it's, nice rookie season, comes on the second half, gives you over 20 yards a catch, some big catches, obviously, to beat Cincinnati, and in the Tennessee game, the out and up and others. He's really been the talk of camp, at least for people out here. Inside, what have you guys seen from Donovan, who really seems to be emerging and developing, a real rapport with Baker as a guy with Odell not running in teams, running with that first unit?
Yeah, he's had a great camp. There's no question. But we also thought he had a really terrific rookie year.
He did.
He as soon as he got into camp, he was very, very bright. He learned all three positions. We knew we could put him anywhere at any time, and that actually created opportunities for him, right? I mean, if you can play anywhere and some opportunity arises, he got the call, and then he rose to the occasion whenever he did get that call. It's interesting. You mentioned he was such a big recruit out of high school. And then, he goes to Michigan. He has a good career. And I think people looking at it as the top wide receiver recruit in the country or whatever he was, that maybe that was disappointing. Well, now the tables are completely reversed because he comes into the NFL as a sixth-round pick, right? So people don't have nearly the same level of expectation. And he's far exceeding those expectations, right? Maybe this is just the player that he was all along. And now we've got him in a scheme where maybe we can showcase him a little bit more.
When you have a staff like you guys do, and Ken mentioned James Hudson earlier, when you have Bill Callahan to help cultivate him, when you know in a running back room Stump Mitchell's going to be there, when you know in the receiver room, for example, Chad O'Shea, who's a proven developer, how much does that change or perhaps enhance your draft philosophy? Like, let's get this guy a great piece of clay because we know the development is going to happen.
Oh, it's absolutely part of our calculus. I mean, and you actually used the exact phrase that we used at one point this year during the draft was, let's get Bill Callahan as much clay as we possibly can, for him to work with. And we feel that way, like you said, about a whole bunch of our coaches. And we feel like we were able to do that this year in the draft with the guys that we brought in. Demetric Felton, I know, has had a great camp and felt like that was a great match with Stump. But players all over the field with the coaches we have, we felt like our coaches could really make a difference with these guys.
Yeah, going to Demetric Felton, what stood out for him? Because there's so many different things that he does, and he falls to you guys, and that I wonder if there's so many teams that are just kind of like, I don't know where to put that guy. You guys seem to have a plan for him.
I think you hit on it. It's the strength is there's so many different things that he does, right? And he's so slippery with the ball in his hands. I think we're anxious to see him in real live, action. But he's dangerous. I think he can create mismatches with people. He can play in the slot or wide receiver. He can play running back. Might see him in the return game a little bit. There are just a lot of different things he can do. And to have a player like that on your roster that's almost a Swiss Army knife is really encouraging, and I'm confident Kevin and our offensive staff figure out ways to get him the ball and make him a big part of our offense.
Well, you guys preach smart, tough, and accountable, and you're like, hey, Demetric, we need you to learn running back, 3 different positions in the wide receiver room, special teams coverage responsibilities, and return responsibilities. I think he's checking off the smart part of it since he's handling his assignments right there, which
and he has
I
a
know
whole
is
6 weeks to do it.
And that's right, yeah, and get it good. Speaking of smart, tough, and accountable, a guy who, Andrew Berry said embodies the soul of this organization. You guys get that done with Nick Chubb, and we're able to lock him up in a deal that makes, I think, everybody happy. And there's some other players. We're looking at Baker, Denzel. From an organization standpoint, how exciting was it to get that deal done? And what does that what's that portend to for the future with some of these other deals that are out there?
Sure. Well, we've spent a lot of time over the last handful of years trying to build the foundation of this organization, right? And the last thing we want to do is lose that, right? We want to keep that foundation together and continue to grow on it. Nick, I used this word earlier, Nick's emblematic of everything we want to be, as an organization, both on the field, off the field. He does everything right every time without being asked and when nobody's watching, right? I mean, he's unbelievable, and he's such a great teammate, such a great player. I know around the time that we announced the signing, people said if it's possible that he's a better player than a person, or a better person than a player,
which
right?
Is saying something.
But he really is. And now, we continue to look at these other players. Obviously, we were able to do Miles last year. We've got Nick done. As you mentioned, there are other ones here in the pipeline that we're excited about keeping. I mean, again, these players are foundational to us, and we think they're going to be a big part of our success going forward.
And it's exciting to see them together. It will be more exciting to see them at September the 12th in Kansas City when this matters. But I know you're looking forward. 6 days away down in Jacksonville. First look at some of the guys that you really want to see on this team. But, again, thanks so much for the time, and we always love your insights and what you allow kind of the fans, that peek behind the curtain of what's happening here with this Cleveland Browns team. So thanks for that. We want to thank all of you, the best fans in all of professional sport, for joining us again here on Browns Live. Our next Browns Live show will be Thursday, August the 12th at the the Cross Country Mortgage campus. Don't forget, coming up, we're in Jacksonville next Saturday for the preseason opener. What a treat it's been to be back at First Energy Stadium. For Ken Carmen, for the Chief Strategy Officer of your Cleveland Browns, Paul DePodesta, I am Nathan Zegura saying thanks for watching Browns Live, presented by Cross Country Mortgage.